By a show of hands, who here has ever been asked, what do you want to be or what do you want to do when you're older? All right, good, just about all of us. Now, the next question I'd like to pose, and again by a show of hands, is have you ever felt as though you've needed to have your whole life perfectly put together at any time? Has anyone here ever felt like they needed to be perfect? Okay. Saw some hands shoot straight up. For the people who didn't raise their hands, I saw some of you nodding your head, so I'll take that also as a yes, and that we're in agreement. So from a young age, we have our family and we have our friends, and they all expose us to certain trains of thought, whether that may be what we're going to do in 3 years or what we're going to do in 10, 15 years. And this is most prevalent throughout 3 different stages of our life. And when they ask us specific questions that can really hone down into our identity and who we are. And the first stage is in high school. And in high school, we're asked all sorts of questions. But one of the main questions we're asked is, so where are you going to college? And then you get to college, and this question simply transforms to, what's your major? And then you get to life, and this question becomes, so what are you doing now? And the constant bombardment of these questions can really make us feel as though we need to have a perfect 20/20 vision and know exactly where we are at all times, whether it be from point A to point B and to point C. But the issue is, I can't even tell you what I'm doing next week, much less maybe what I'm doing in 4 years. And so when we're asked these questions, oftentimes it can do more harm than good and even lead some of us down the wrong path. 3 years ago, I spoke at a high school to a bunch of seniors, and I asked them one question. I said, what's everyone here doing after high school? And in typical high school fashion, you have a few of them raising their hand halfway, others a quarter of the way, and then the majority just didn't raise their hand. But there was a few people, including one person who I'll never forget, her hand shot up in the air like this. So I was like, all right, I have to pick her. So I picked her. She stood up. She said, and you can tell she was nervous, and she said, hey, my name is Stacy, and I'm going to major in education. I want to be a teacher. I actually really love teaching. I love it. And she said this with such an infectious smile and such enthusiasm that it vibrated throughout the whole room. So it was almost impossible not to believe her. But out of the corner of the room, all of a sudden her teacher goes like this, and she says, but Stacy, you are at the top of your class. You should be a doctor. You're smart. You should be a doctor. And the whole room fell silent. Stacy, jaw dropped, emotionless, looking at her teacher, and then she looked at the ground and then slowly sank into her seat without saying anything. The poor girl didn't look up for the remainder of my presentation, and it was hard for me to talk because this was all I could think about. But afterward, I had a Q&A with some of the students, and Stacy personally came up to me, and she came up already slouched. She wasn't even looking up. And I said, what was all that about? What's going on? And not even looking at me, she says, well, I don't know, Armando. Some people tell me that. My friends tell me that I should be a doctor. My parents told me that I'd be wasting college if I was a teacher. I just don't know. And then she looked up at me, crossed her arms, and almost trying to search for a glimmer of hope in my own eyes, she says, I don't know. I mean, I guess they're right. I guess I should be a doctor, right? I mean, I am good at science. And this was my aha moment. This was the moment when I realized so many of us have been in Stacy's shoes before because we blindly follow this path. And soon enough, we don't even know what our own truth is and what's false. After this day, I lost track of Stacy for about 2 years. But earlier this year, we got back in touch and asked her, what's going on? How's college? What's your major? And she started off by telling me that she was a bio major pre-med, so obviously she listened to everyone else. But she was doing really good. She said, I'm doing good. And before I could interject, she said, but you know what? Life sucks, Armando. It sucks. And then before I could even ask why, she's like, you know what? I'm seeing my psychiatrist 3 times a week. I'm on anti-anxiety medication. and I'm depressed. And at this point, I didn't know what to say, so I didn't try to interject again. But she took it a step further, and she said, but you know the worst part? The worst part is that everyone thinks my life is perfect. Everyone looks at me and they say, here's Stacy, she's going to medical school. Here's Stacy, she's the president of all these clubs. Her own parents are all validated on the fact that they think her life is perfect. But in reality, as she told me, she says, all I want is for someone to ask me what I want. All I want is for someone to ask me what I want. So at this point, I finally got a word in, and I said, so what are you doing about it? And she said, it's funny you ask, because I reflected so much. And right before I turned 20, my junior year, I went to the office, dropped my major, switched to education, called my parents, and told them everything that had been happening throughout the last 2 years. And I told them I would probably spend another year or two in college because I switched my major so late. But she said, I'm going to be a teacher. And this was the moment that I realized she had that same smile, that infectious smile that she had 3 years ago when I met her and she was a high school senior. Countless times, we blindly follow the advice given to us, and if we're not careful, soon enough, we end up with the blind man's vision. So now, let's go back to a time when we were younger. Let's say elementary school. We probably didn't have many responsibilities. We were running wild, probably letting our imaginations run wild. And one of the questions I remember sometimes being asked was shorter back then. And so the adults would kind of bend over and they'd say, son, what do you want to be when you're older? What do you want to do when you grow up? And so this led me to a survey conducted by the website Fatherly in 2015, when they asked 500 kids between the ages of 1 and 10, what do you want to be when you grow up? And it's crazy because as we see up here, the first one, pro athlete, followed by a doctor, followed by they don't know, and an astronaut is up there. So I found this to be insane because these are careers that take so much time, so much patience, and so much dedication. And usually adults will look at us when we're kids, and I remember this very vividly. There would be a few people that looked at me when I was 7, and I would say, oh, I want to be an athlete, just like one of my favorite athletes, or I want to be a doctor, or I want to be a dentist, just like my parents. And they'd say, all right, go for it. That's awesome. Good job. Good job. And the issue here is this changes because as we get older, we get into high school. And in high school, we become even more segregated into the smart kids, the average kids, and the dumb kids. And the way this happens is by the activities that we do. Are we going to be in ASB? Maybe we're going to be on the football team. Or maybe we're going to be accepted into National Honor Society. Or what about the classes we take? Are we going to be the AP kid, or are we going to be the regular kid in the regular classes? All this plays such a crucial role into how we formulate our identities and exactly with what we do. But it also plays a big role because right around this time, we're started to be asked the question of, where are you going to college? And there seems to be this notion in high school that we have to pick the best grades, get the best test scores, be the captain of our football team, and also be the president of all the clubs we're in. And this is kind of how Stacy felt. So the interesting thing to me is that as we get a little bit older and we start to grow up, the anxiety and the pressure that we feel to be perfect, to pick all this stuff and know exactly where we're going can continue. Because as we get a little older, we get to college. And in college, as I'm sure a lot of us know, we not only have our family and our friends, but we also have our new friends and professors all asking us all sorts of questions. We all want to make friends. But the main question we're going to be asked, what's your major? And I'm sure, as I see some of you guys kind of nodding your head again, we get asked that so many times. I was a tour guide in undergrad, and I was asked thousands of times, so what's your major? So I had a little script, and the beginning went a little like this. Good afternoon, my name is Armando. I'm a sports medicine major and a Hispanic studies major. And yes, before you ask, I am going into medical school. Because as I'm sure we can agree, people will say, what's your major? And then you say business. And then they say, oh, so what are you going to do with that? So you not only now have to know your major, you have to know what you're going to do with it. And I don't even know what I'm doing next week. So the problem becomes that this pressure and this anxiety just continuously eats us up. So it's no wonder that according to the American Psychological Association, roughly 1/3 of college students experience depression. And I remember when I was a senior, and even the seniors that I speak to today, I say, what's going on? Are you excited? They say, I'm nervous. I'm scared. I don't even have a job. I don't know what I'm doing. And so it's interesting because this is one of the first times in our lives that we're going into uncharted territory. So this territory that I speak of is what we call life. And in life, you're going to be asked all sorts of questions. I remember when I graduated, they just hit me like a brick. Everyone was saying, oh, you're going to get a job? Oh, why are you in that job? I thought your major was sports medicine. And so they're trying to connect the dots. You feel like you need to explain yourself. If you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, the investigation continues. Are you guys going to move in together? Are you guys going to stay together? Are you guys going to break up? It's like, man, it's so much pressure to just have a definite answer to these questions. But the one question that remains the same, whether we're 20, 40, or 60, is what are you going to do now? What's going on now? So the problem with that is that oftentimes, as we get older, as I said, we don't know what we're doing. We don't know what's going on. And as this study shows, there's a study that came out in 2015 by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and only 27% of college students, 27%, end up at a job that has some sort of relevance to their major, and 61% end up at a job that doesn't even require a college degree. So this, to me, was mind-boggling. If you would have told me that I would be in both of these categories, my majors don't apply, I don't even need a degree for my jobs right now, I would tell you, you're crazy. There's no way. But again, we get older and we leave college and people ask us, what's going on now? What are you doing? And the problem with this, and the problem as I see it, is that we as human beings, they ask us, what are you doing now? And we feel like, oh my gosh, I need to have an answer for this. I need to have something to say. And so oftentimes we have milestones that we want to hit. Before 20, I hear people say, oh, I should be in college. Before 30, I need to have kids. And before 40, I better own a house. But what happens when we don't accomplish these things? What happens? So there was this study that came out in 2014, and what these graphs show is that near the end of a decade, people are more likely to cheat on their partner through an extramarital affair, and also more likely to run a marathon for the first time. So what I found, and these graphs are created by Melissa Dahl in an article that she wrote for The Cut, is that we're so blinded and we think, yeah, I'm going down this path, I know exactly what I'm doing. And then, like Stacy, we say, this isn't what I want. I don't want to be a doctor. I want to be a teacher. And she said that right before the end of a decade, because we tend to think of 20, 30, 40, or 50 as a fresh start. We tend to think about it as a fresh start. So, in conclusion, everything will happen at its own time as long as you let it. There's time to leave that career that you just don't like. There's time to leave that bad relationship that's doing nothing for you. There's time to do as we please. I've personally met people who at 10 years old knew exactly what they wanted to do for a career, and at 60 years old, they're doing the same thing, and they're just as passionate about it. But I've also met people who are 55 and feel like a loser, feel fraud, and then I ask them, and they say, I'm not really sure what I'm doing. But they're barely touching the cusp of what they're passionate about, barely touching it. I've also met people who at 15 found the love of their life, and now, 50 years later at 65, they're still holding hands, still doing the same things that we should all be doing. But I've also met people who at 50 got married for the first time. So we have to learn to go with our own flow, and in order for us to grow, we need to evolve. Our identities are not deciphered, nor are they created by the questions people ask us, nor by what people's opinions are of us, but they're created by the journeys that we live. So the thing here that we always have to remember and be conscious of is that as long as we know that it's okay to not know what you're doing, it's okay to suck, it's okay to be lost and wander, then you'll get to the end of your life and you won't be living the blind man's vision, but you would have found your own journey. Thank you guys very much.